This is a very important moment for us.
The crowd went silent. Cameras flashed. And in that breathless pause, young Princess Charlotte's bright smile faded, replaced by confusion, maybe even hurt. Standing beside her, Queen Camilla's comment, whispered yet sharp, seemed to echo louder than the applause. No one dared react. No one, except one man. A royal guard, trained to be stone-faced, suddenly moved. His jaw clenched. His eyes locked on the Queen. What could possibly make a man bound by royal duty break his silence? What did he see or hear that the cameras missed? Before we dive into this royal moment that shocked witnesses and melted hearts around the world, make sure you've subscribed. Hit that like button if you believe respect should go both ways, no matter how royal the title. And share this story with someone who still believes that quiet dignity can speak louder than crowns. Ready? Let's uncover the truth behind the moment the guard's stare stopped the show. It was one of those perfect London mornings that seemed made for history. The sun slipped through light clouds, glinting off palace gates polished to a mirror's shine. Flags fluttered across the courtyard, and a low hum of excitement rolled through the crowd gathered outside Buckingham Palace. Children on shoulders waved tiny Union Jacks. Reporters murmured into microphones. Tourists craned their necks for a glimpse of the royal family. It wasn't just another appearance, and it was a celebration, a moment meant to show unity, continuity, and grace. And at the center of it stood the new generation: Prince William, Princess Catherine, and their children, George, Charlotte, and Louis. Charlotte, dressed in a pale blue dress with matching ribbons, was the image of composure. She held her mother's hand tightly, scanning the crowd with wide, curious eyes. At just 8 years old, she already carried that royal posture, poised but still innocent enough to be fascinated by the noise and color around her. Just a few steps behind her stood Queen Camilla, regal, confident, and impeccably dressed. The contrast between generations was striking. Camilla's smile, perfected for the cameras, never faltered, but something in her demeanor felt heavy. The ceremony was in full swing, a tribute to the armed forces, filled with precision drills, brass band marches, and the rhythmic clop of hooves as the mounted guards rode past. The king, dignified and calm, observed from the balcony. Every move was choreographed, every gesture symbolic. And then, there were the royal guards. Tall, silent, and statuesque in their scarlet uniforms, they lined the edge of the platform. Each man a monument of discipline, trained to stand through hours of ceremony without flinching. The air shimmered slightly in the sunlight, but not a single guard moved, except one. His name wasn't known to the public then, but among the ranks, he was called Sergeant James Harwood, a man who had served through countless ceremonies, parades, and crises, a man whose loyalty to the crown was absolute. Until this day. As the trumpets echoed across the square, the family began greeting honored guests. William bent slightly to help Louis wave at the crowd, earning a chorus of laughter. Catherine's calm warmth drew every camera, and Charlotte, shy but eager, stepped forward when a little girl handed her a bouquet of white flowers through the barrier. "Thank you," Charlotte said softly, her voice almost lost in the wind. The girl giggled. It was a sweet, human moment, the kind that made headlines for the right reasons. But just behind them, something subtle shifted. Queen Camilla leaned down toward Charlotte. Her lips moved, voice low, expression carefully measured. Only those standing closest, and the royal guard stationed nearby, could hear. Charlotte's expression changed, just slightly. Her little shoulders stiffened, the smile vanished. She blinked up at Camilla, uncertain. Whatever was said, it wasn't gentle.
William, caught up in conversation, didn't notice. Catherine's attention was turned to Louis. The cameras, too far away, caught only the faint moment Charlotte's hands lowered, bouquet clutched tighter. But one pair of eyes caught everything. Sergeant Harwood, standing less than 3 meters away. His training told him to remain expressionless. His orders were clear: No reaction, no interference, no emotion. But his jaw twitched, the smallest tell, and for a brief instant, his gaze shifted from straight ahead to Queen Camilla. It wasn't defiance. It was instinct, the kind that rises when something feels wrong. Charlotte looked down, pretending to adjust her dress. The child's composure returned. Remarkable, really. But the moment had already passed like a quiet ripple through still water. The ceremony continued, brilliant and polished. The crowd cheered as the royal carriage arrived. The band struck another tune. But that brief exchange had changed the atmosphere. Faintly, almost imperceptibly. To the public, it was still perfection. To those closest, something about the Queen's expression seemed strained. When the family gathered for the official photo on the palace steps, Charlotte stood a step behind her grandmother, eyes fixed on the ground. Camilla smiled for the cameras, holding her pose like marble. Sergeant Harwood remained still, but inside his mind raced. He wasn't supposed to think. He wasn't supposed to feel. But there was something about the way Charlotte had looked, that tiny flicker of confusion and sadness, that cut through every rule he'd ever followed. He'd seen many royal interactions over the years. He knew the difference between protocol and cruelty. And though no words of disrespect could ever be proven, he knew the tone, that subtle, quiet edge that said, "Know your place." As the national anthem played, Harwood's throat tightened. The honor of serving the crown meant everything to him. But at that moment, it didn't feel like loyalty. It felt like silence. And he wondered, for the first time, whether silence was the same as betrayal. The anthem ended. The ceremony closed. The family turned to wave. The crowd erupted once more in cheers and applause. Charlotte smiled again, faintly this time, and turned to her mother. Catherine leaned down, whispering something that made the little girl's eyes brighten. The sadness melted, replaced with a small knot of courage. But Harwood saw it all. He saw the contrast. He saw the difference in the way a mother lifts a child's heart, and how easily a thoughtless remark can break it. Later, when the royal family retreated back into the palace, Harwood's shift officially ended. Yet as he marched off the courtyard, the image wouldn't leave him. The trembling of small fingers clutching that bouquet, the faint hurt in those blue eyes, and the look that passed between a queen and a child. Something had shifted, not just in him, but in the air around the crown. And though no one spoke of it publicly that day, the story would soon find its way into whispers. Whispered first among the guards, then the staff, then the world. Because sometimes it's not the loud moments that change history. It's the quiet ones, the ones caught only by those who still remember how to feel. The event should have ended on applause. But inside Buckingham's courtyard, a strange tension clung to the air, the kind that slips between people without anyone saying a word. The royal family was expected to reappear briefly before the crowd dispersed. For photographers, this was gold, the candid family moment that newspapers live for. Every camera was aimed, every reporter alert, but not one of them knew that, in the next few seconds, something utterly unscripted would unfold. Princess Charlotte stood beside her mother again. Her small hands fidgeted with the bouquet she'd received earlier. She smiled politely when spoken to, but kept her gaze low. Her usual spark dimmed. Queen Camilla turned toward her. At first, it looked like nothing, a grandmotherly gesture, a simple lean down to speak softly. But Sergeant Harwood had a perfect angle from his position near the royal steps. He saw Camilla's expression change before she spoke, that subtle narrowing of the eyes, the almost imperceptible lift of her chin. Her words were quiet, but the wind carried just enough. "Stand up straight, dear. You're representing the crown, not the playground." A harmless correction, maybe, but there was something in the tone, sharp, clipped, dismissive, like a whisper meant to wound, not guide. Charlotte froze. Her lips parted slightly. Her chin lifted, but not from pride, from instinct. A small child trying not to cry in front of thousands. To anyone else, it looked like a moment of discipline. To Harwood, it looked like embarrassment. And he wasn't alone. One of the other guards shifted his eyes for half a heartbeat, enough to catch Charlotte's startled face. But Harwood was the only one who reacted. His jaw tightened. His fingers flexed just slightly on the handle of his ceremonial sword, a gesture so tiny it would have gone unnoticed if not for cameras. In the footage replayed later, freeze-framed by journalists and dissected by body language experts, viewers would point to that exact second. The guard's eyes narrowing, his head moving by a fraction of an inch, watching Camilla. That wasn't protocol. Guards never make eye contact with the royal family during events. Their duty is to the public image, to the perfection of posture. But for that instant, Sergeant Harwood wasn't a guard. He was a man. Charlotte swallowed hard, looking up toward her mother. Catherine, ever intuitive, noticed something was wrong. She leaned down, brushing a strand of hair behind Charlotte's ear. "You all right, darling?" Charlotte nodded quickly, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The cameras captured the tail end of the exchange. The Queen's faint smirk, the guard stare, Charlotte's strained composure. But no one watching live could piece it together. Not yet. The ceremony concluded moments later. The family turned to head inside the palace. Harwood stepped back to attention, the weight of what he'd seen burning in his chest. The sound of boots on cobblestone echoed like thunder in his ears. His discipline screamed at him, "Do not react. Do not feel. Do not think." But the human part of him, the father, the soldier, the man, refused to bury what he just witnessed. As the family disappeared through grand doors, the guards rotated positions. Harwood's shift partner, Corporal Denton, glanced sideways. "You good, mate?" Harwood didn't answer right away. "You heard it too?" Denton hesitated. Then, in a near whisper, Poor kid. That was all. No more words. But that small exchange said everything. Even among men trained to be statues, empathy found its way through the cracks. Later, as the palace quieted and the crowds thinned, Harwood was assigned to perimeter patrol, a brief, solitary duty near the gardens. The noise faded into distant echoes. He could finally breathe. He replayed the scene in his mind. The Queen's tone, Charlotte's face, the way Catherine had looked concerned but restrained. It wasn't his place to judge royalty, but it was his place to recognize right and wrong. And in that moment, Harwood made a quiet vow. If he ever saw that child hurt again, emotionally or otherwise, he wouldn't stand still. He didn't know that vow would soon be tested. Hours later, inside the palace, whispers began spreading among the staff. A housemaid had overheard a conversation. Something about the Queen not being pleased with Charlotte's behavior. Another staffer mentioned a guard who'd looked ready to break formation. The story grew in shadows, a single whisper turning into a rumor, carried by curiosity and compassion alike. By evening, snippets of the footage had already leaked onto social media. Someone had caught that precise moment. The Queen's lean, Charlotte's startled look, the guard's micro-expression. "Did you see the guard?" A user commented under the clip. He glared at her. That's not normal. Within hours, the video exploded across platforms. The guard who broke formation. The look that shook Buckingham. Official spokespeople brushed it off as internet exaggeration. But among palace staff, the story took root. And Charlotte, the innocent center of it all, went to bed unaware that the world had already noticed her quiet humiliation. Meanwhile, Sergeant Harwood sat in his modest quarters, polishing his boots in silence. The reflection of his own face stared back from the black leather. He wasn't angry, just thoughtful, because now, every time he closed his eyes, he saw Charlotte's, those soft, bright eyes dulled for a single moment by words that never should have been spoken. He didn't realize that this incident would soon pull him into the heart of royal tension, where loyalty would clash with conscience, and where even a single glance could change everything. And for the first time in his career, he began to question if protecting the royal image meant ignoring what was right. Was it still service, or was it silence wearing a crown? The next morning, his commanding officer summoned him to the briefing room. "Sergeant Harwood," the officer said, tone clipped. "The palace press office noticed your reaction during yesterday's ceremony. You'll be interviewed." Harwood blinked, steady but calm. "Interviewed, sir?" "Yes. The palace wants to ensure perception control. You'll deny any irregularities." "Understood." Harwood's heart sank. So they'd seen it too. The glance, the tension, the truth. And now they wanted it erased. That moment, more than anything else, would decide what kind of man he truly was. The loyal soldier or the silent witness who finally spoke. The interview room inside Buckingham Palace was small. Too small for the weight it carried. A single table, a single light, 2 chairs, and a portrait of the king hanging just above the door, eyes painted with unblinking calm. Sergeant Harwood stood before it, hands clasped behind his back. His uniform was immaculate, boots gleaming, posture rigid. But beneath that flawless exterior, a storm was raging. Across the table sat Major Ellison, his commanding officer, a man known for being fair, but fiercely loyal to the institution. And beside him, a woman from the Palace Press office, perfectly composed, holding a sleek tablet and a clipboard that looked more like a verdict than a document. Sergeant Harwood. The major began, voice clipped. You've served with honor for over a decade. Your record is spotless, which is why this issue must be handled delicately. Harwood said nothing. His eyes didn't move. The woman cleared her throat softly. During yesterday's public ceremony, there was a moment. Her tone was polite, but polished, rehearsed. Your facial expression appears to have drawn public attention. The footage has been circulating online. Harwood nodded once. I've seen it, ma'am. Good. Then you understand the importance of perception control, she continued, smiling in that way people do when the smile means the opposite of warmth. You'll confirm that your movement was due to fatigue, or perhaps a shift in stance. Nothing more. Understood. Harwood hesitated. A single second, barely noticeable, but heavy as stone. Major Ellison's voice cut in. That's an order, Sergeant. Yes, sir, Harwood finally replied. His tone was steady, but something inside him cracked just slightly, a hairline fracture beneath years of discipline. The meeting ended quickly. He signed the form, rehearsed the statement, and walked out into the open courtyard where the wind carried faint echoes of the city. For a moment, he removed his bearskin cap and closed his eyes. The air felt cold against his skin. He'd obeyed orders his whole life, orders that built the very foundation of the monarchy's strength. But for the first time, obedience didn't feel like honor. It felt like surrender. That evening, the news channels were relentless. Clips replayed in slow motion. The Queen's whisper, the princess's reaction and the guard's faint glare. Analysts debated it on live panels. Some called it a touching moment of humanity. Others called it a breach of protocol. But most people just felt something genuine in that split second. He looked angry for her. One commentator said softly, "That's not rebellion. That's protection." Online, the story had already gained its own name, the Silent Protector. Hashtags trended. People drew comparisons to knights of old, men who defended the innocent, even at the cost of titles. Fan art even appeared. The guard standing like a sentinel behind a small princess, sunlight breaking through clouds above them. Harwood never asked for fame. He wanted none of it, but he couldn't escape it. Everywhere he turned, whispers followed. Some of his fellow guards avoided his gaze. Others, quietly, nodded in respect. It wasn't open defiance. It was quiet solidarity, the kind that doesn't need words. But inside the palace, not everyone was pleased. The Queen's private secretary summoned the major for a report. Her Majesty finds the entire matter distasteful, he said crisply. The narrative paints her unfairly. Control it. And just like that, an internal campaign began, subtle, quiet, designed to erase. News outlets received official clarifications. Certain clips were flagged for misrepresentation. And yet, the internet remembered. Because truth, once seen, is hard to unsee. A few days later, Harwood received an unexpected assignment. Temporary security rotation at Windsor, far from Buckingham. A routine reassignment, they called it, but he knew better. It was exile polished with royal courtesy. He didn't protest. He saluted, packed his kit, and left in silence. But fate has a strange way of looping back. His third day at Windsor, while stationed near the garden paths, he heard laughter, light, familiar, and echoing through the trimmed hedges. He turned slightly. It was Princess Charlotte, running ahead of her governess, skipping between the roses. For a moment, she looked carefree again, a child unburdened. Harwood watched from a respectful distance, his gaze softening. And then something unexpected happened. Charlotte tripped. Not badly, just enough of the bouquet in her hands to scatter petals across the gravel. She froze, worried someone might scold her. Before the governess could reach her, Harwood instinctively stepped forward. "Your Highness," he said quietly, bending to gather the flowers. "They're just petals. Happens to the best of us." Charlotte blinked up at him. Recognition flickered. "You're the guard from the parade." He smiled faintly. I suppose I am." There was a pause, innocent but deep. Then Charlotte whispered, almost conspiratorially, "Thank you for looking at me that day." He froze. She remembered. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked, voice small but honest. Harwood shook his head slowly. "No, Princess. You did everything right. You stood tall." Her eyes brightened a little. "Mama said it's okay to feel sad sometimes, even in front of people." Harwood's throat tightened. "Your mama's a wise woman." He handed her the last of the petals. She smiled, a real one this time, and ran off to rejoin her governess. As he watched her go, something settled inside him. That vow he'd made, to never stand silent again, wasn't about rebellion. It was about humanity, about remembering that even in a palace of crowns and ceremony, kindness still mattered. That night, in the guard's quarters, he wrote a short letter, not to anyone official, but to himself. Silence is easy, but sometimes silence is the heaviest armor a man can wear. And armor is meant to protect, not hide. He folded the paper, tucked it into his pocket, and returned to duty. From that day on, whenever Princess Charlotte appeared at events, Harwood was there, not by command, but by quiet request from someone else entirely. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, had noticed his conduct, his empathy, his restraint. And she, of all people, understood the value of silent protectors. By now, the public had moved on to other royal headlines. But within the palace walls, Harwood's small act had left a lasting impression. He was no longer just a guard. He had become a symbol, not of rebellion, but of integrity. Because sometimes protecting royalty doesn't mean defending crowns. It means defending the people beneath them. And in a palace where words could wound sharper than swords, one man's quiet glance had reminded everyone, even those with titles, that true nobility isn't inherited. It's chosen. Weeks passed, and London returned to its usual rhythm. Carriages, cameras, and the whisper of royal gossip weaving through the city's veins. But inside Buckingham Palace, something had changed. Not publicly, not officially, but quietly, like a candle lit in a dark corridor. The footage that had once caused uproar slowly faded from the headlines. The palace's official statements had done their job. No impropriety occurred, they claimed. The Royal Guards movement was due to fatigue. Yet among those who had seen the unfiltered video, the real one, there was no forgetting, especially not for Catherine. She had seen the look in her daughter's eyes that day, and she had noticed the guard, the man who dared to care. So when the next royal engagement arrived, a charity event for children's hospitals, Catherine made a quiet request. "Assign Sergeant Harwood to my detail," she said calmly to her aide, "and ensure he's close by." No one questioned her. After all, the Princess of Wales was known for her empathy, her quiet understanding of people. The event was smaller this time. No balcony, no grand parades, just a visit to a children's ward in London. But for the royal family, it carried more meaning than most public ceremonies ever could. Charlotte was there again, standing proudly beside her mother, wearing a simple floral dress. She smiled, shy but real, and standing discreetly in the corner of the hall, watching from behind his polished helmet, was Sergeant Harwood. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His mere presence was enough. As Charlotte knelt beside a young patient to hand him a teddy bear, she glanced briefly toward Harwood. He smiled with his eyes, a small, almost invisible nod of encouragement. That moment, pure, warm, and silent, would later appear in photos. And though the public didn't know the story behind it, Those within the palace did. Later that afternoon, after the event ended and the press had left, Catherine approached Harwood in the corridor. "Sergeant," she began softly, "I wanted to thank you." He bowed slightly. "For what, Your Royal Highness?" "For seeing what others didn't." He didn't know how to respond. But Catherine continued, her tone low and sincere. "I know what happened at the parade. I know you were told to deny it. But I also know you didn't look away, and that matters." Harwood's throat tightened. He had no words. Catherine offered a gentle smile. "Charlotte remembers you. She calls you the guard with kind eyes." For a man trained not to feel, those words pierced through every layer of restraint he had. "Thank you, ma'am," he managed quietly. Catherine nodded. "You remind me of something my husband once said, that duty without heart is just obedience. You showed heart. That's rarer than loyalty." She turned to leave, then paused. "Sergeant, if anyone ever makes you feel your compassion was a mistake, remember, it wasn't. Not in my family." And with that, she was gone. Harwood stood alone in the corridor long after her footsteps faded. The golden afternoon light filtered to the palace windows, glinting off the medals on his chest. He thought of his oath of service, of silence, and of how one child's courage had reminded him why he'd sworn to protect in the first place. He wasn't protecting titles. He was protecting innocence. Later that night, as he walked the quiet palace grounds, he passed the royal garden where Charlotte had once dropped her bouquet. A few petals still grew from the same bush, pale white, brushed with gold by the evening light. He stopped there for a moment, hand resting on the cold iron railing, and allowed himself to breathe deeply, freely, because now, finally, he felt at peace. But peace, like truth, has a way of traveling. Months later, the silent protector story resurfaced in a royal documentary. The clip, brief, respectful, never scandalous, focused on the humanity of those who served the crown. A narrator's voice described the moment. In a world bound by protocol, sometimes the truest form of loyalty is compassion. A royal guard's glance reminded us that duty and empathy need not stand apart. The camera lingered on the still image of Harwood, standing tall, eyes steady, beside the little princess. Viewers were moved. Letters poured into the palace, not of outrage, but of admiration. Messages from veterans, from teachers, from parents, thanking the man who'd reminded the world that even the strongest must sometimes protect with heart, not armor. Harwood never spoke publicly about it. He didn't need to. His silence had already spoken louder than any interview ever could. Years later, when Princess Charlotte was older, perhaps 12 or 13, she attended another public ceremony. The same balcony, the same polished guards. But one detail stood out. As she stepped onto the platform, she turned ever so slightly toward the nearest guard post and smiled, a small, knowing smile meant for someone she remembered. And though the world didn't know it, that smile was for Sergeant Harwood, because kindness once shown doesn't vanish. It echoes through time, through generations, through the walls of even the grandest palaces. As for Harwood, he eventually retired from service. He settled quietly near Windsor, where he tended his garden and took long walks near the Thames. He rarely spoke of his royal years. But sometimes, when neighbors asked if he ever met the royal children, he'd chuckle softly. He'd say, "One of them taught me that even a guard can learn what courage really looks like." And when they asked what he meant, he'd just smile, the same quiet, unreadable smile that had once stopped a queen in her tracks. Because the truth was simple. In a palace built on tradition, it wasn't the crowns or titles that shaped history. It was a single moment, a whisper, a glance, and a man who refused to forget what was right. And though his story would never make the official record, it would live forever in the quiet pride of a princess, and in the unspoken lesson he left behind. Sometimes the bravest act of loyalty is to simply see and to care. If this story touched you, don't forget to hit like. It helps more people see moments of quiet strength like this. Subscribe for more powerful royal stories that reveal the human hearts behind the titles. And remember, every act of kindness, no matter how small, writes its own piece of history.